Okay, so I wanted to do a basics video on the EliteDesk 800 G4 Mini. I've done them for the G2 and the G3, but I thought it was time to do the G4, especially since it seems like that's becoming a much more popular unit because of the fact that it is fully supported by Windows 11, meaning it's got a processor that is listed in the supported processors list, and it also has TPM 2.0. So for those that are thinking of getting a G4 or maybe have a G4, but they want to know a little bit more about it, I just wanted to give kind of a basic overview of the unit. If you've got a G5 or thinking of G5, this talk about the G4 is very similar because the units are so alike that you can use a lot of the same information. So first off, on the front, pretty standard looking in terms of a lot of the EliteDesks. You've got the USB-C, you've got two USB-A ports, of course, the headphone and headset jack power. On the back, you've got two display ports. You've got four total USB-A. You've got a Flex I/O that you can change out. This particular one has another display port, but you could add USB-C. You can do USB-C with power delivery. You could do HDMI. You've got your Intel RJ45 power connector. Over here is where you'd have your antenna. I believe you can actually use this as a secondary antenna one, but I've never really seen any of them really use it. This little doodad for doing the lockdowns. Let's see. On the back or bottom, you'd have kind of the standard information in terms of telling you what you've got. This is a 35-watt unit, serial number product. This is going to give you a quick way to know what was originally in there, which in this case is a i5 8500T. We're going to be showing you primarily a 35-watt unit, but I'm going to talk a little bit about there's actually three flavors that you can get. There's a 35, a 65, which a lot of them have, the other types like the G3, etc. But this also has a 95-watt unit. That's one in which you can add a K processor, one of these ones that can do overclocking. It needs a lot of additional TLC in terms of heatsink, etc. But we'll talk about a little bit about that later. Let's open it up. Thumb screw on the back. If I have a 35-watt unit, I'm going to have this top that, just a standard black top here. If I've got the 65 or the 95-watt unit, I'm going to have these vents on here. And you can actually buy, this is what I did in this case, you can, it's a little hard to find, but you can actually buy these separately. And if you wanted, you can take this and put it on your 35-watt if you want more ventilation. Inside, you're going to have your caddy and SATA connector. If I had the 65-watt, it's going to look similar to this. This is an additional fan. There's a fan header down here that you plug this into, and then that way it gets a little extra cooling for the unit. Everything else as far as the connector is the same. Nice thing with this is that it's all one unit in terms of you can just pop it right up. With, of course, the G3, it's got an additional screw right here, which makes it a little annoying because then you got to take the fan and the screw. This only has two screws here and then the two screws for the SATA cable. These units can take, as far as spec, up to 32 gig of DDR4 memory. I've seen a lot of folks put in 64 gig in these without a problem. Processor-wise, in the standard 35 watt unit, you can go up to an i7 8700T. 65 watt, you can do the same, but it's a non-T processor. And then if you have the 95 watt, you can get the i7 8700K. If you go with that, and they're extremely rare to find. I've only seen one ever sold on eBay. It comes with a heatsink that's all the way across. It just pretty much envelops. It's got an extra fan that plugs into here, into that same fan header. So you've got essentially fan here, extra sort of duplicated heatsink here. Both of these, of course, would be copper. And I've looked to see if you could find even the heatsink, and that's kind of hard. I haven't seen that for sale either on eBay. If you go with the 95 watt, there's like an extra post. This screw is a little over, and then there's a post that sticks here because that's what everything's going to screw into. So it screws into these two and this extra post, and of course the normal 3 screws that you normally would have for the heatsink. Let me take this off here. Regardless of model, you're going to be able to put, or there at least there conceivably, you've got 2 places where you can put a 2280 NVMe drive in there. They will also support the 2230, but these screws are funky. This was real hard to find, and these are not the same either. So, but you can find them. I have a G5, and I'm using 2 of the 2230s in here. But you can mix and match. You could put a 2280 here and 2230 here. If you want to use the caddy, you're going to have to use a 2230 here. Because if you put a 2280, it's just not going to fit. I've got a video that shows that. I know that folks have done things where they cut it up. They've got, they've 3D printed stuff. And that's, more power to them. But as far as out of the box and as far as HP is concerned, you cannot have a 2280 here and put in the caddy. So again, the 2230s, if you can find the screw here, you're just going to have to do a little messing around. It is have a pretty fat, base to it to fit in there. Of course, it supports the Wi-Fi. Now, one thing with the 35 watt, which I have here, one thing that the 35 watt supports that none of the others supports is you can buy a graphics card that you take out the caddy, you take out the the cable. It pretty much fills this whole thing. It plugs into that same header because it's got its own fan, and then it's going to click into this guy, and I believe, well, you're also going to remove this, the Flex IO, but it's also going to fit into here. But that only works with the 35 watt. And if you look at the specs, it calls that out. You will need a 150 watt power supply instead of the normal 65 watts power supply that you would use with the 35 watt unit. That 150 watt is also what's needed for the 95 watt unit. I know it gets confusing with, but when they talk about, like, they call it a 35 watt unit or a 65 watt or 95 watt, they're talking about the processor. But in order to run it, you're going to need something that has even more juice because, of course, you're not just running the processor, you're also running, the rest of the unit. The other thing that the 35 watt has is this extra header here. This is used with a Flex IO that does USB-C with power, excuse me, USB-C with power delivery, meaning you could actually run this unit off of, what do they call a wall wart that was kicking out 65 watts or maybe even 60 watts. You could plug it in the back if that's needed. But that's one of the other differences. In my book, it's almost not worth it unless you really want a non-T processor. It may not be worth it to get the 65 watt a G4 Mini. I would instead see if you can buy all the components. Like in this case, I got the top, again, I got the caddy. If you look hard enough, you can also find the copper heatsink and use that. So that way then you get all the benefits as far as the cooling. But you still keep, if you wanted to do things like the USB-C, I guess if you wanted to do the graphics card in there, you'd have already all set up for the cooling for that also. Because I believe it's recommended that you get the slotted, although it's kind of funny because the graphics card is the one that comes with the 35 watt, and the 35 watt just has this kind of cover. So, go figure. Okay, you may have seen in one of my other videos, you can actually put a 9th gen CPU in here. I was able to run a i5 9500T inside of here. And it's not in the specs, but because the G4 and G5 are near identical, it would only make sense that it would also work in there. The only thing I've ever seen different was I tried using a 9700K in one of these, and it was a no-go. But I did get it to work in a G5 just for a short amount of time, but I didn't have the cooling system and I didn't want to burn out anything. One little gotcha with these guys is that you've got your Wi-Fi going this direction. With the G3 and the older ones, they were always going this way. So it made it a little easier if you wanted to add yet another 2230 as a drive. You can get one of those adapters that fits in here. If you want to try to do it with this, it doesn't look pretty. Even with a right angle, it's not a good thing. I would just stick with what you've got as far as your connectors here. You can, of course, get also the adapters that will you can connect to here and then add a second RJ45 port here that you'll need a special 3D printed sort of adapter that fits in here that works with it. That's in another video that talks about how to add a second network card to a G4, G5. Cost-wise, their G4s are still up there. Not too bad. You're probably looking in the low 100s. The part that probably makes them the most expensive is the fact that let's say the i5 8500T is going to run you 50 to 60 bucks just for the CPU. So even if you were to get it bare bones, I don't know, 40, 50 bucks, you're still going to be spending a good amount of money just to get it up and working. But at least you can, if you've got a SATA drive laying around, if you've got DDR4 memory, you can always utilize that. But it's the CPU that's going to cost you the money and overall unit. As opposed, do I go with G4 versus G5? I like both. Our G5 is kind of the family computer now. I use a G4 that runs Proxmox. I have it running Jellyfin and I'll probably be doing some more VMs on it. One kind of cool thing with the G4 and G5 is that it supports, I don't know, again, if you know, it's really not hardware RAID, but it does have the ability to take two of your NVMe drives, and what it can do is mirror them in such a way through Windows so that that way, if one were to go bad, at least the stuff that you've written, you know, would have gone to both places and, you know, secured your data. So as far as a unit, you know, they're very dependable. You know, you'll probably see more of them on the market. I have a feeling that because of the fact that they're fully supported by Windows 11, you may start seeing prices go up on them. So if you are thinking about getting one, I would probably get one now before, especially as we get closer to next fall when support for Windows 10 goes away.